Im Hashem al Hashemayim Kvodo, that God is above all nations, His glory is in the heavens. Mik Hashem Elokeinu, who is like God, our God, Hamagbihi Lo Shaves, who is sitting on high, Hamashpili Liros, who yet agrees to look down, to empathize, to connect with, Bashamayim Uva'aretz, what is transpiring in the heavens and the earth. Now, what's interesting about these three sentences, and this, I think, highlights a common monotheistic theme that links together not only Judaism and Islam, but Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I mean, all three great Western monotheistic religions. There's a built-in tension bordering on paradox in the three verses that I read, because the earlier of the three verses suggests that God is sort of contained in a heavenly abode, that there is a kind of spatial, there's a spatial location that is identified with divinity, namely the heavens. And yet, the third of the verses that I read says that God looks down from wherever he is to the heavens, and he's above the heavens. In other words, the third verse that I read sort of impugns and delegitimates the connotations of the earlier two verses, as if to nullify the idea that we can spatially locate God. God cannot be spatially located. He's so utterly transcendent, so uniquely one, that any kind of spatial identification, even the one that occurs most naturally to humankind, namely the heavens, has to be discredited, has to be put in brackets or quotation marks, whatever one's idiom of distancing might be, in order for us to get a more theologically justifiable sense of who he is in relation to us. Now, this idea gets echoed in another verse in the Psalms that's included in the Hallel service and incorporated into the Haggadah, namely a verse that's actually reiterated by Maimonides, who is a central figure not only for Jews but for Muslims. From what I understand, he's on the syllabi of Islamic universities throughout the whole Muslim world, as he is in Jewish studies departments all around, the Western world. And, this is entirely appropriate. His great philosophical work, The Guide of the Perplexed, was written in Arabic and only translated into Hebrew during his lifetime, into English, into Latin, a whole host of other languages, but it's an Arabic work, and in accordance with recent scholarship, Maimonides, living in Muslim civilization, actually converted to Islam. In other words, overtly he was a Muslim, but he did his great works of Jewish legal codification and philosophy as someone overtly practicing the Islamic religion. So he's, from the perspective of Judaism, he's the first Marrano. Except he's not a Christian Marrano, he's an Islamic Marrano. So in any event, he's a hero to three faiths. He is also the great teacher of St. Thomas Aquinas. Albertus Magnus was his student. Albertus Magnus was a key influence on St. Thomas. And St. Thomas, is a negative theologian, doesn't go the full distance that Maimonides does, but goes far enough down that road to stamp him as, in important respects, if not a disciple, having pronounced affinities with Maimonides. And Thomistic forms of religious practice, even today, from what I understand, are very negative theological. In other words, they consist in sort of one achieves an ecstatic encounter with God by renouncing by emphasizing the distance. God isn't this, and he isn't that, and he isn't that. By golly, and I'm getting closer and closer. By being able to sort of focus, continually in my religious consciousness, all of this overwhelming, unbridgeable distance that separates me from him. That's the only point of access, in Thomistic liturgical practice. From what I understand, this is an important element. That's very Maimonidean. So he's a figure who straddles all three religions. And in Maimonides, he echoes again and again another verse of the Psalms that is important in the liturgy of the Passover holiday. I'll say it, it's one sentence, I'll say it in Hebrew and then translate into English. Hashamayim shamayim la'Hashem va'aretz natan levnei adam. The heavens are the heavens of God, but the earth has he given to the sons of man. In other words, in the end, everything, including our organization of our religious lives, is our responsibility. Now that's the Maimonidean reading of this, that the extent of sort of human responsibility, which goes hand in hand with the governance, so to speak. We govern and have responsibility over all of the affairs of humankind, even our religious affairs, and that is God's will. I mean, that is the role that God has assigned to us. Before I sort of make a kind of brief argument and brief exploration of what of my theme, I just want to say that I've been participating. I live in the Overbrook Farm section of Philadelphia, which is a highly multiracial, multi-ethnic neighborhood. It's one of the few that I'm aware of, in the cities that I've lived in. And there's a heavy concentration of Jews, Christians, and Muslims sort of living side by side. I have a very close friendship with the local imam, and I've participated with him in a Muslim-Jewish dialogue over the last 7 years. So I've been studying the Quran under his auspices, continually. As we focused upon one theme or another, I would cite sources from the Hebrew scriptures and from rabbinic commentaries thereon, and he would be citing, the correlative passages in the Quran and the tremendous literature that the Quran has spawned, the Hadith literature and all the other commentaries and commentaries upon commentaries. And what emerged in our dialogues was in which both Muslims and Jews participated as members of the audience and asking questions and communicating with us throughout, was a remarkable sense of confluence between these two religions. And the confluence has to do with the starkness of the recognition of the metaphysical distance that separates even the community of the faithful in both Judaism and Islam from God. A commitment to the radical, indescribable, ineffable oneness and uniqueness of God theologically links together Judaism with Islam. In Judaism, one of the classic formulations of this principle is in the Shema, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. A verse in Deuteronomy 6:4, which is incorporated thrice daily in Jewish liturgy in the morning and in the evening prayers and in the prayer recited before retiring for the night. In the Quran, the theme of God's conceptually uncontainable, untranslatable oneness runs like a leitmotif throughout the text. For example, in A.J. Arbery's interpretation, the following phrase with variations reappears many times. God, there is no God but He, the living, the everlasting, the absolute oneness. And coming to grips with the oneness, I think, both helps to establish a basis for community between Judaism and Islam and Christianity, but I'm not going to be able to go into that tonight, and also addresses the political question of what, sort of theologically speaking, we are licensed politically to do. How does this sort of very abstract, almost ethereal, highly metaphysically charged understanding of God, how can it be perceived, and how can it be understood as harboring momentous political implications? That, I think, is a crucial question. As one begins to pursue this question, I think very extraordinary and exciting possibilities begin to loom on the horizon. there is a highly paradoxical and surprising logic that adheres to this unremitting preoccupation with God's special oneness in Judaism and Islam. Let me just sort of paraphrase this orally. That is, God being supremely one, once the logic of the idea of oneness is confronted, as Maimonides attempts to confront it in the Guide of the Perplexed, confronting the logic of the oneness debars us from placing God, our descriptions of him, our conceptions of who he is, in any comparative human context, because willy-nilly, no matter how superlatively we delimit him in that context, as long as there's any kind of linguistic continuum that links him with things human, then his oneness is being tarnished, is being diminished, is being undermined. In other words, the only way that Maimonides suggests that the pristine, absolutely transcendent and unapproachable oneness of God can be appreciated is by translating the whole divine vocabulary, all of the attributes that the communities of the monotheistic faithful have traditionally ascribed to God, understanding them as metaphors rather than as literal descriptions. So that when we say that God is all-knowing, we then have to say, but not in a sense in which human beings cultivate knowledge. We have no conception of what knowledge signifies in relation to God. The adjective one of one itself has to be deliteralized. We can't know what God's oneness signifies in relation to him. In other words, to speak of God as being one is only a term charged with significance in our necessarily impoverished, human vocabularies. We have no sense of what the term one, transcendent one, the unique one, what that signifies in relation to him. In other words, it's the whole categorical dichotomy between the one and the many, oneness and multiplicity, just as the categorical dichotomy between knowledge and ignorance, the categorical